first contact with the Empire did not happen with greetings or messages of peace, but with fire that burned a quiet human colony on the edge of explored space. A place where miners and engineers lived under thin metal domes on a cold moon called Hanul 4, and in those first moments when the sky turned red with alien weapons, people like Jisoo Kim, a young systems engineer, ran through shaking corridors trying to save data cores that held years of research, while Min-Sik Lee, a colony security officer, shouted orders that no one expected to ever use in real combat, and Yuna Park, a communications technician, kept trying to send distress signals that were being blocked by something far stronger than anything humans had seen before, and yet even as explosions broke the surface of the colony, there was no panic across all of humanity, only silence from the higher networks, as if the entire species had stopped breathing at the same time. The Empire fleet, massive and shining, with cold metallic arrogance, believed they had struck a weak and unprepared race, because no immediate counterattack came, no wave of ships jumped in, no desperate retaliation followed, and their commanders, beings who had conquered dozens of systems, recorded humans as non-reactive primitives. Unaware that on Earth itself, deep inside hidden command centers beneath mountains and oceans, Admiral Jiho Park was watching every second of the destruction with calm eyes, while analysts like Sujin, Choi and Doyen Han studied the alien energy signatures with unsettling focus, not speaking much, only comparing patterns, because what the Empire saw as silence was actually observation, calculation, and adaptation happening at a speed no alien empire had ever understood before. On the burning colony, Min-Sik dragged survivors into underground tunnels while Jisoo stabilized failing life support systems, and Yuna finally managed to break through a weak frequency gap, sending fragments of data that were already being decoded on Earth in real time, and what the humans saw in those fragments was not just destruction, but structure, logic, and weakness hidden inside the Empire's attack formation. Across Earth's defense network, young officer Ji-hoon Kong and strategist Hannah Lim realized something terrifying and exciting at the same time. The Empire's weapons were powerful, but their coordination patterns were predictable, almost rigid, like a machine that never expected its enemy to learn during battle, and humanity was already learning faster than any machine. Within hours, Earth did not respond with rage but with mapping, every destroyed structure becoming a data point, every energy blast turned into a coordinate, every enemy movement turned into a mathematical model that Sujin refined again and again until her hands shook from lack of sleep, while Doyen suggested something unusual that no one immediately rejected or accepted. Instead of fighting the Empire head-on, they should let the Empire believe humanity was still slow, still weak, still confused, because surprise was now the only shield Earth truly needed. Back on Hanul 4, Jisoo and Min-Sik found a surviving alien transmission relay buried under debris, and what they discovered changed everything. The Empire was not simply attacking randomly, it was testing response thresholds, measuring fear, timing reactions, and building a psychological map of humanity's behavior, and this meant the attack was not just war but evaluation, a cruel scientific experiment done on living people, and when Yuna heard this through the broken channel, she whispered quietly that the Empire had already made its first mistake, because humans did not behave like predictable subjects, they adapted under pressure, they evolved in real time, and they learned best when survival was at stake. On Earth, Admiral Jiho Park finally spoke in a sealed council, his voice steady and low, saying that humanity would not respond immediately with fleets because that is what the Empire expected. Instead they would respond with absence, with silence that felt like weakness but was actually preparation. And while the Empire celebrated its first strike as success, human engineers like Sujin were already rewriting communication protocols to mimic alien frequencies, while Hannah designed decoy signals that would later drift into Imperial space like false echoes of fear. Days passed and the destroyed colony was abandoned by the Empire as irrelevant, but for humanity it became something else entirely, the first broken mirror that showed the face of their enemy clearly, and inside that broken mirror, Min-Sik carved evacuation routes while protecting the last survivors. Jisoo transmitted every recovered alien data shard to Earth, and Yuna kept one final hidden broadcast running, not for rescue, but for observation, because even in destruction she believed information was still life. When the Empire fleet moved on, convinced no resistance would come, they left behind only ashes and silence, not knowing that in that silence humanity had already begun to speak in a new language of strategy and precision, and across Earth, every military station, research lab, and orbital platform came to the same quiet conclusion. The Empire had struck humanity first, but it had also awakened something it would never be able to predict again, something that did not roar or scream, but watched, learned, and waited. After the destruction of Hanul IV, humanity did not respond with panic or loud declarations of war, but with a deep and controlled silence that spread across every communication channel like a shadow. And inside this silence, the real response was already forming in hidden places where only a few trusted people were allowed to see it, such as deep underground command hubs in Earth's mountains and undersea stations where Admiral Jiho Park and his inner council worked without rest, studying every fragment of alien data recovered from the destroyed colony, while analysts like Sujin Choi, Doyen Han, and Hannah Lim worked side by side with engineers like Jisoo Kim and Yuna Park who had survived the attack, each of them carrying memories of fire and loss but also valuable knowledge about how the Empire fought. What the Empire did not realize was that humanity was not only grieving, it was learning, and learning in a way that turned pain into structure, because every destroyed corridor, every burned system, every broken transmission from Hanul IV was being rebuilt in simulations thousands of times faster than real time, and inside those simulations the Empire's attack patterns were being dismantled like fragile glass, while Jihun Kong and other tactical officers discovered something that made the entire room fall silent again and again. The Empire did not adapt during battle, it followed fixed expansion logic, meaning once its structure was understood, it could be predicted, and once it was predicted, it could be manipulated. Meanwhile, Jisoo Kim worked with shaking hands not from fear now but from exhaustion as she rebuilt the colony's lost communication logs, and in those logs she found repeated scanning signals from the Empire fleet, not random destruction as first believed, but systematic probing, as if humanity had been studied like an unknown specimen, and when she shared this with Yuna Park, Yuna's expression turned cold because it meant the Empire had not attacked out of fear or aggression alone but out of curiosity, testing limits of reaction, measuring response delay, mapping emotional instability, and this realization changed everything about how Earth viewed the conflict, because it was no longer just invasion, it was evaluation. In response, Hannah Lim proposed something unusual that divided the Council at first, a strategy not of defense or offense but of controlled invisibility, where human signals would be reduced, hidden, and fragmented, so that the Empire would never fully understand whether humanity was retreating, preparing, or already striking elsewhere, and Admiral Jiho Park approved it quietly, knowing that in war against an unknown intelligence, being unreadable was more powerful than being strong. Across Earth's defense network, silent operations began, and young officers like Min-Sik Lee, who had survived Hanul IV's destruction, were reassigned to special reconstruction teams where they trained not for battlefield confrontation but for pattern disruption, learning how to break enemy logic chains instead of enemy ships, while Sujin Choi developed a predictive model that began to simulate possible Empire decisions several steps ahead, almost like thinking inside an alien mind, though every time the model ran, it revealed something unsettling. The Empire always expected linear behavior from its enemies, always assumed fear led to chaos, and always assumed recovery would be slow, which meant humanity's greatest advantage was already visible in its difference. Meanwhile, on Earth's orbital stations, communication specialist Doyen Han and his team began broadcasting controlled false fragments into deep space, not full signals but broken patterns that resembled distress calls, fleet movements, and even fake colony activity, designed carefully so that any Empire listener would believe humanity was scattered, disorganized, and emotionally unstable, while in reality every fragment was part of a larger hidden structure that only Earth's inner council understood. Jisoo Kim and Yuna Park continued analyzing recovered alien technology, discovering that Empire systems relied heavily on centralized coordination nodes, meaning if those nodes were disrupted even slightly, entire fleets would misinterpret orders, a weakness so simple it almost felt intentional, and Min-Sik Lee suggested quietly that such a structure could collapse not from brute force, but from confusion, from misinformation, from making the Empire doubt its own data. As weeks passed, the galaxy outside human space began to change subtly, because neighboring systems that once feared the Empire started hearing strange whispers in intercepted channels. Fragmented messages repeating the same phrase, not from a single source but from many directions at once. Run while you can. And although no one could trace the origin, suspicion slowly turned toward humanity, even though Earth remained officially silent. Inside the council chamber, Admiral Jiho Park finally acknowledged what they were becoming. Not a conventional military power, but something harder to define, a species that turned observation into strategy and survival into intelligence. And he warned that the greatest danger was not the Empire's weapons, but its certainty, because once a species believed it understood its enemy, it stopped learning, and in that moment it became vulnerable. Sujin Choi agreed, adding that their simulations showed the Empire would eventually escalate its attacks based on incorrect assumptions about human weakness, which meant the longer humanity stayed silent and unreadable, the more mistakes the Empire would make on its own. In the quiet aftermath of these decisions, Min-Sik Lee stood alone in a reconstructed training hall, remembering the burning corridors of Hanul 4, and instead of anger, he felt something sharper and colder, clarity, because he now understood that humanity was not preparing for a single battle, but for a long process of being misjudged by an enemy that could not yet see what it was dealing with. And across the hidden networks of Earth, as false signals drifted into space and real intelligence flowed inward, one truth slowly became absolute. The Empire had struck humanity first, but in doing so it had also forced humanity to become something it had never needed to be before, something quiet, adaptive, and invisible, already moving far ahead in a war the Empire still believed had only just begun. Humanity's silence did not last forever, but when it finally broke, it did not break loudly or openly. Instead it spread through hidden channels, encrypted bursts, and carefully shaped false signals that drifted through the galaxy like broken light. And inside Earth's command network, Admiral Jiho Park oversaw what had now become a new kind of warfare, where truth and deception were no longer separate tools but blended together into one controlled system of survival. While Sujin Choi, Doyen Han, Hannah Lim, Jisoo Kim, and Yuna Park worked in different layers of the same invisible machine, each of them shaping pieces of information that would never fully reveal humanity but would instead shape how the Empire misunderstood it. After the destruction of Hanul 4, human strategy had shifted permanently, and now every action was designed not to show strength, but to shape perception, because Sujin's models had proven something dangerous and useful at the same time. The Empire reacted faster to belief than to reality, meaning if they believed humanity was weak, they would act aggressively and carelessly, and if they believed humanity was fragmented, they would expose more of their structure in response. This understanding led to the creation of what Hannah Lim called the Echo Layer, a network of false signals, decoy colonies, and simulated fleet movements that existed only as mathematical ghosts inside transmission space, while Doyen Han ensured those signals carried enough consistency to appear real but enough instability to prevent full decoding, creating a constant state of uncertainty in any Empire listening post. Meanwhile, Jisoo Kim and Min-Sik Lee were sent to a newly established deep space analysis station orbiting the dark side of Luna, where they worked on recovered alien command fragments, and what they discovered there changed the entire direction of Earth's defense philosophy, because embedded within Empire communication codes was a behavioral loop that repeated across multiple systems, showing that the Empire did not just coordinate fleets, it enforced obedience through predictability, meaning any deviation inside their system caused hesitation across entire battle groups. Yuna Park, who had once sent the first broken distress signals from Hanul 4, now worked on refining controlled transmission distortions, and she realized something important while testing signal echoes across deep space. The Empire was not just listening for targets, it was listening for patterns of life, meaning every civilization it encountered was being measured not just for power but for consistency of behavior, and this made humanity's unpredictability a weapon in itself. As weeks passed, the Echo Layer began to spread beyond Earth's immediate space, and nearby systems that once served the Empire started detecting strange inconsistencies in Imperial intelligence reports, because different fleets were receiving different versions of human activity. Some showing retreat, others showing expansion, and others showing complete disappearance. And this contradiction created confusion inside Imperial command structures, though the Empire still believed the fault lay in data corruption rather than intentional design. Inside Earth's Council, Admiral Jiho Park watched these developments with measured caution, knowing that confusion alone would not defeat an empire built on conquest, but it would slow it, and in war, time was often more valuable than firepower. Sujin Choi's latest simulations showed a growing divergence in empire response models, meaning the more false data they received, the more their internal coordination weakened, and Hannah Lim suggested increasing the complexity of the Echo Layer by introducing artificial civilizations, completely fake star systems built only from signal patterns, designed to appear like emerging human colonies but always vanishing before direct contact could be confirmed. Jisoo Kim, working with Min-Sik Lee, helped design these phantom colonies, and while they were only digital illusions projected across deep space, they were so carefully constructed that even Empire sensors occasionally reacted to them as if they were real, sending scouts into empty regions and wasting valuable time and resources. During one deep analysis session, Unipark noticed something unsettling in intercepted Empire responses. Hesitation was increasing, not in their machines but in their coordination rhythm, as if the Empire's entire system was beginning to slow down under the weight of conflicting interpretations, and this was the first sign that humanity's strategy was working beyond expectation. However, not all results were predictable, because in one region of space, an Empire reconnaissance fleet encountered a phantom human signal that was supposed to disappear, but instead of vanishing, it triggered a full-scale Imperial investigation, suggesting that some parts of the Empire were beginning to suspect intentional deception, though they still did not understand its source. Back on Luna Station, Min-Sik Lee reviewed combat simulations and realized something that troubled him deeply. The Empire was beginning to adapt, not by changing its structure, but by increasing its tolerance for inconsistency, meaning humanity's advantage might slowly weaken if deception became too common, and he reported this to Jiho Park, who listened carefully and responded that every strategy eventually creates its own countermeasure, and therefore humanity must always stay one step beyond what the Empire believes is possible. Sujin Choi then proposed a dangerous extension of their strategy, suggesting that humanity should not only create false signals but also allow small, controlled real encounters with Imperial scouts, just enough to reinforce the illusion that humans were scattered and disorganized, while in reality each encounter would be carefully managed and analyzed for further weaknesses. This idea divided the council because it introduced real risk again, but Hannah Lim supported it, arguing that fear alone could not sustain long-term deception. Only controlled exposure could maintain credibility. Meanwhile, Jisoo Kim and Unipark began preparing the first controlled encounter zone near a dead star system, where a single human signal beacon would appear to malfunction in a way that invited Imperial attention, and Min-Sik Lee was assigned to monitor any incoming response fleets, ready to extract data or intervene only if necessary. As the plan was set into motion, Earth's hidden networks remained silent to the rest of the galaxy, but within that silence, humanity was no longer hiding in fear. It was shaping the battlefield itself without ever revealing its full form, and across the dark distances of space, the Empire unknowingly drifted deeper into a web of perception, where every move it made was already anticipated, and every assumption it formed was already being guided, while humanity prepared for the moment when silence would no longer be enough, and the real structure of the war would finally begin to show itself. The first controlled encounter began in a region of space that had once been part of a dead star system, where humanity placed a single distorted beacon designed by Hannah Lim and refined by Sujin Choi to appear like a failing human colony signal drifting weakly in deep space, and as expected, it did not take long before an Imperial reconnaissance fleet arrived, drawn by what their systems interpreted as an unstable but potentially valuable target. Watching from Luna Station, Admiral Jiho Park remained silent as the situation unfolded in real time, while Jisoo Kim and Unipark monitored every fluctuation in the signal, and Min-Sik Lee tracked the incoming fleet movements with tense focus, knowing that this was the first moment where deception would either prove itself or collapse completely. The Imperial fleet, composed of sleek metallic ships arranged in rigid formation, slowed as they approached the beacon, scanning it repeatedly, and their hesitation was not fear but confusion, because the signal did not match any known classification pattern, sometimes behaving like a colony, sometimes like a relay, and sometimes like nothing at all, and this inconsistency forced them to split their analysis units, weakening their coordination exactly as Sujin had predicted. Inside Earth's command network, Doyen Han observed the communication feed with careful attention, noting how Empire vessels were now exchanging conflicting interpretations of the same data, some identifying the beacon as a human settlement, others calling it a trap, and others suggesting it was abandoned technology, and this disagreement spread slowly through their fleet like a crack forming in glass. Hannah Lim quietly adjusted the signal pattern from Earth's side, introducing subtle variations that made the beacon appear to react to observation, as if it was aware of being watched, and this small change caused further disruption in Imperial analysis systems, because their models did not account for targets that behaved like observers rather than objects. Meanwhile, Min-Sik Lee prepared extraction protocols in case the situation escalated, while Jisoo Kim noticed something unexpected in the Empire's scanning behavior. They were not just analyzing the beacon, they were trying to predict what would happen if they ignored it, meaning even in their caution they were still following a structured decision path that could be exploited. As the Imperial fleet moved closer, they deployed small probe drones that surrounded the beacon and began deep scanning its origin point. But what they found was even more confusing, because the signal appeared to come from multiple overlapping coordinates, none of which fully aligned, and this contradiction forced their command ship to pause all forward movement for a critical review cycle, effectively freezing their advance. Back on Earth, Sujin Choi saw this result in real time and allowed herself a brief moment of relief, because it confirmed that the echo layer was not just working, it was actively slowing Imperial decision-making, and Jiho Park finally spoke, saying that hesitation in an enemy fleet was more valuable than destruction, because hesitation spread uncertainty upward into command hierarchies. However, the Empire did not remain passive for long, and soon a senior coordination vessel arrived to override local confusion, attempting to re-establish control by simplifying the data interpretation process. But this action actually made things worse, because the simplification removed nuance from the analysis and caused different fleet sections to receive incompatible instructions. Unipark, monitoring this shift, realized that the Empire's greatest weakness was not lack of intelligence but over-reliance on structured interpretation, meaning that if structure broke, even slightly, their entire system struggled to adapt. As tension increased, the Imperial fleet attempted a direct test by firing a low-energy pulse at the beacon, expecting it to either collapse or respond predictably, but instead the signal shifted in response, changing tone and structure as if it was alive, and this was not an actual reaction but a carefully designed illusion by Hannah Lim's system, yet it was convincing enough that several Imperial analysts reported the presence of an unknown adaptive intelligence. At this moment, Min-Sik Lee observed something critical. The fleet had stopped advancing completely, forming a loose orbit around the beacon. Instead of engaging it, meaning the Empire was now trapped in analysis paralysis, unsure whether it was facing a trap, a relic, or a living system. Doyen Han then introduced a secondary distortion layer, sending faint echoes of other human signals in nearby space, making it appear as though multiple similar beacons existed across different coordinates, and this immediately triggered a shift in Imperial strategy, as they began dividing their fleet to investigate these phantom sources. Sujin Choi confirmed that this fragmentation was ideal, because dividing the fleet reduced their ability to maintain unified command response, and Jiho Park ordered that no additional real interference be introduced, allowing the Empire to continue dismantling its own coordination through uncertainty alone. As hours passed, the Imperial vessels grew increasingly cautious, with some units requesting retreat protocols while others demanded escalation. And this disagreement spread further, creating internal friction that had never existed in previous campaigns. Jisoo Kim noticed that Imperial communication cycles were now longer than before, meaning decisions that once took seconds were now taking minutes, and in war, even small delays could become fatal over time. Hannah Lim, however, warned that success also brought risk, because once the Empire fully recognized the pattern, they would begin adapting aggressively, possibly abandoning structured analysis entirely in favor of brute force detection. Methods. Jiho Park acknowledged this possibility and prepared contingency layers, ensuring that if the echo strategy collapsed, humanity would still retain hidden defensive depth. As the controlled encounter neared its end, the Imperial fleet finally withdrew slightly from the beacon, not in retreat but in cautious repositioning, marking the first time humanity had successfully forced an Empire fleet into hesitation without direct combat. And as they departed, Min-Sik Lee watched the fading lights of their ships and realized that the war had already changed shape, because it was no longer about who had the strongest weapons, but about who could control what the enemy believed was real. And across Earth's hidden command systems, Sujin Choi, Hannah Lim, Doyen Han, Jisoo Kim, Unipark, and Admiral Jiho Park understood the same quiet truth. Humanity had not yet defeated the Empire, but it had already begun rewriting the rules of how the Empire understood existence itself. After the first controlled encounter ended with the Imperial fleet withdrawing in confusion rather than confidence, humanity did not celebrate, because in the quiet rooms beneath Luna Station and deep inside Earth's hidden command centers, Admiral Jiho Park and his team understood that hesitation was only the beginning of a longer struggle, and not victory itself, so the next phase of the echo layer was activated with even greater care, expanding the network of false signals, phantom colonies, and shifting transmissions that now spread across multiple star lanes like a web of invisible threads. Sujin Choi worked continuously to refine predictive models that could simulate not only Imperial responses but also their possible adaptations, while Hannah Lim adjusted the echo layer's behavior so that each false signal carried subtle inconsistencies that made it feel alive without ever becoming fully understandable, and Doyen Han coordinated the distribution of these signals through deep space relays, ensuring they appeared naturally scattered rather than artificially placed. Jisoo Kim and Yoona Park, still carrying memories of Hanul 4, worked together on analyzing new intercepted Imperial communications, and what they discovered was both encouraging and dangerous, because the Empire had begun introducing a new layer of internal verification across their fleets, meaning they were now actively trying to identify deception within their own systems, a sign that humanity's strategy had forced them to evolve. Min-Sik Lee, now assigned to forward monitoring operations, observed this change closely and reported that while the Empire's coordination was improving again, it was doing so in a slower, more cautious manner, as if every decision now carried suspicion inside it, and Jiho Park responded that suspicion itself was becoming part of the battlefield. Across the galaxy, Imperial fleets that once moved with absolute certainty now paused more often between jumps, checking data streams and comparing interpretations, and this delay created gaps in their expansion schedule that other alien civilizations quietly noticed, though none yet understood the cause. Inside Earth's Council, Sujin Choi presented a troubling projection, showing that if the Empire continued to adapt at this rate, they would eventually develop methods to detect artificial signal structures, meaning the echo layer would lose effectiveness unless it evolved further. And Hannah Lim immediately proposed the next stage, which involved introducing controlled imperfections into real human signals, blending authentic Earth origin transmissions with echo-generated distortions so deeply that even human analysts would struggle to separate truth from design. This idea was risky, because it meant exposing real human activity to the same uncertainty used against the Empire, but Jiho Park approved it, stating that survival required shared vulnerability if necessary. Meanwhile, Doyen Han implemented the first test of this hybrid system by allowing a small, real human mining convoy near a distant asteroid belt to transmit under modified echo interference, and when Imperial sensors detected the convoy, they hesitated more than before, because the signal did not match any known classification, appearing partially real and partially artificial at the same time. Yoona Park monitored Imperial reactions closely and noticed something significant. The Empire was now spending more time debating classification than executing action, which meant their operational efficiency was dropping, even though their technological capability remained unchanged. Jisoo Kim analyzed the convoy's transmission patterns and realized that the Empire was beginning to build a new kind of internal model, one that assumed deception might exist everywhere, and this was causing them to slow down across multiple sectors simultaneously. Min-Sik Lee, observing from forward space, reported that Imperial fleets were beginning to avoid rapid engagement entirely, instead forming temporary observation clusters before committing to action, and this shift created openings in their territorial control that human analysts marked as soft gaps. Regions where influence could be subtly expanded without direct confrontation. Sujin Choi, however, warned that this development was double-edged, because an enemy that learns to expect deception might eventually stop reacting to it altogether, and instead rely on brute force verification methods that could overwhelm ecosystems. Hannah Lim responded by suggesting a deeper evolution of the strategy, where humanity would no longer only shape Imperial perception but also subtly influence their decision-making thresholds, guiding them toward inefficient choices without ever directly interfering with command systems. Jiho Park considered this carefully and agreed to limited trials, emphasizing that humanity must remain hidden even while influencing outcomes because exposure would collapse the entire advantage they had built so far. As these changes were implemented, Imperial fleets began experiencing increasing internal delays, with command structures requiring multiple verification cycles before executing even simple maneuvers, and while this reduced their expansion speed, it also made them more stable against obvious deception, creating a new equilibrium in the conflict. Doyen Han observed that this meant the war was entering a phase where neither side could easily dominate without risking self-exposure, while Yoona Park pointed out that stability itself could become a weakness if it reduced adaptability. Meanwhile, Jisoo Kim and Min-Sik Lee worked on mapping Imperial hesitation patterns, discovering that certain fleet regions were more susceptible to confusion than others, especially those farthest from central command nodes, suggesting that distance weakened Imperial cognitive consistency. Sujin Choi used this information to adjust predictive models again, showing that targeted echo interference in peripheral regions could cause disproportionate disruption in Imperial coordination, and Hannah Lim quickly integrated this into the system, expanding echo density in those zones while maintaining silence in core regions to avoid detection. Across the galaxy, the Empire continued its expansion, but at a slower and more uncertain pace, encountering more unexplained inconsistencies in data than ever before, and although they still believed themselves superior, their certainty was gradually being replaced by structured doubt. In Earth's hidden command centers, Jiho Park finally acknowledged that humanity had moved beyond simple defense or deception, and was now operating at the level of behavioral shaping, where the enemy's understanding of reality itself could be influenced without direct contact. And as the Council looked at the vast network of signals spreading through the stars, they understood that the Empire had not yet been defeated, but it was no longer fighting against an unknown primitive species. Instead, it was slowly becoming entangled in a system of perception it could not fully escape, while humanity remained unseen behind it, quietly guiding the shape of a war that was only beginning to reveal its true scale. As humanity's echo layer spread deeper into Imperial-controlled space, the galaxy began to shift in ways that were not immediately visible on star maps or fleet reports, but were felt in delays, contradictions, and silent gaps where certainty once existed. And in Earth's hidden command network, Admiral Jiho Park and his team understood that they were now operating inside a war that no longer looked like war in the traditional sense, because there were no front lines, no fixed battles, only perception shaping perception across vast distances. Sujin Choi worked day and night refining adaptive models that could predict not just Imperial actions but Imperial corrections to those actions, while Hannah Lim expanded the echo architecture into multi-layered systems that allowed false signals to evolve naturally over time, and Doyen Han ensured that every transmission carried just enough irregularity to appear organic while still serving a hidden structure of controlled influence. Jisoo Kim and Yuna Park, now deeply involved in long-range signal analysis, began noticing a disturbing but fascinating trend in intercepted Imperial data, because the Empire was no longer reacting only to human signals, but also to the patterns of deception itself, meaning they were beginning to study the structure behind the illusion, even if they did not yet fully understand its origin. Min-Sik Lee, stationed at a forward monitoring post near a quiet asteroid belt relay, reported that Imperial fleets were now deploying what they called uncertainty probes, small exploratory units designed not to engage targets but to test the reliability of information itself, and this marked a major shift in Imperial strategy because they were adapting not just tactically but philosophically, beginning to treat reality as something that might be unreliable. Inside Earth's council chambers, Jiho Park listened carefully to these reports and understood that the echo strategy had forced the Empire to evolve beyond simple expansion thinking, and while this was a success, it also meant that the conflict was entering a more dangerous phase, because an adaptive enemy eventually learns to question everything, including the very existence of deception. Sujin Choi confirmed this concern with updated simulations showing that if the Empire reached a full verification-based doctrine, they would begin sacrificing speed for certainty, and while this would slow them, it would also make them far harder to mislead, because they would no longer trust patterns alone. Hannah Lim responded by proposing a new modification called soft divergence, where human and echo signals would no longer blend perfectly but would instead drift slightly apart over time, creating controlled contradictions that would prevent the Empire from ever locking onto a single interpretation, forcing them into a continuous state of reassessment. Doyen Han implemented early versions of this system across several fringe sectors, and almost immediately Imperial communication networks showed increased processing load, as fleets began sending repeated confirmation requests for even minor navigational decisions. Yuna Park observed that this was causing a subtle but significant slowdown in Imperial expansion velocity, as fleets that once moved with absolute confidence were now pausing to verify even stable data, and Jisoo Kim added that this verification behavior was spreading upward through command hierarchies, meaning hesitation was no longer local but systemic. Min-Sik Lee reported a critical observation from the field, noting that some Imperial units were now refusing to act on echo-influenced data entirely unless it was confirmed by multiple independent sources, which reduced their exposure to deception but also made them vulnerable to delay-based disruption. Meanwhile, Sujin Choi discovered something even more concerning in predictive models, because as the Empire reduced their susceptibility to false signals, they also began developing partial immunity to behavioral shaping, meaning humanity's influence techniques would need constant evolution or risk becoming ineffective. Jiho Park took this information seriously and ordered the next phase of strategy development to focus on dynamic adaptation, ensuring that no echo pattern would remain stable long enough to be fully decoded, while also emphasizing strict secrecy to prevent any traceable human signature from emerging. Across the galaxy, the Empire continued its expansion, but the nature of that expansion had changed, becoming slower, more deliberate, and increasingly burdened by internal validation processes that consumed time and resources. And although they still believed themselves dominant, their actions now carried visible hesitation where once there had been certainty. In one sector near the outer spiral lanes, Minsik Lee observed Imperial fleets splitting into multiple subunits simply to confirm basic sensor readings, and this fragmentation created temporary openings that human analysts marked as influence gaps, areas where subtle echo adjustments could guide Imperial movement without direct engagement. Jisoo Kim and Unipark studied these gaps carefully and realized that the Empire was beginning to build redundancy into every decision, meaning they were trying to eliminate the possibility of deception by making every action require multiple confirmations, but this also made them slower and more predictable in how they processed uncertainty. Hannah Lim noted that this behavior could eventually become a structural weakness, because systems overloaded with verification tend to collapse under complexity when faced with rapidly changing inputs, and Sujin Choi immediately began modeling scenarios where controlled bursts of echo interference could trigger such overload without revealing human involvement. Doyen Han tested one such scenario in a remote corridor of space, where a minor Imperial fleet was exposed to layered soft divergence signals, and within hours the fleet entered a prolonged decision cycle, repeatedly recalculating navigation routes and failing to commit to a stable trajectory. Unipark confirmed that this delay propagated upward to larger command nodes, showing that even localized uncertainty could affect broader Imperial coordination. Jiho Park then summarized the situation for the Council, stating that humanity was no longer merely surviving or hiding, but actively shaping the cognitive rhythm of an entire interstellar empire. And while this power was dangerous, it was also fragile, because any overreach could reveal the existence of the system behind it. As the session ended, Minsik Lee quietly reflected on how far the war had shifted from the burning silence of Hanul 4, where fear had first begun, to this new invisible battlefield where decisions themselves were the target. And across Earth's hidden networks, Sujin Choi, Hannah Lim, Doyen Han, Jisoo Kim, Unipark, and Jiho Park all understood the same reality without needing to say it aloud. Humanity was no longer reacting to the Empire, it was now moving within the Empire's perception itself, shaping its choices from the shadows. And as the echo layer continued to evolve, the line between reality and influence grew thinner with every passing signal.